Hello and welcome. The people demand more tier lists, and I am willing to deliver. Undead units. Which ones are the best and which ones are fit just to serve as compost? That is going to be today's tier list. Which units are the best in a game of Warcraft 3 Melee? As usual, my experiences will be based on the 1v1 game mode, as I have most of my experience there. And every time we discuss a unit, we're not just going to say how good or strong or weak they are, but also when they are supposed to be used, when they have traditionally been used, and perhaps a little history about the unit and its historic uses as well, as you are familiar with from me by now. So first of all, let's begin with the Acolyte. Acolyte is undeniably tier S, and I've got reasons for it too. Acolyte not only provides the entire undead race with gold to do everything else, they're a fantastic enabler, but Acolytes also can unsummon buildings so that they can recoup some costs, they can recoup some resources, half of the building cost, to further drive certain timings. You see top undead players selling their altar in the second half of the late game, because at that point you have decided that if you are ever going to lose a hero, you are just going to rebuy it at the tavern anyway. Rebuying a hero at the tavern costs lumber in addition to the gold it costs. Altar Revive doesn't cost any lumber. It could cost you 1 to 200 lumber there. And also double the gold cost. Nonetheless, that is usually worth it in Warcraft 3 because you get your hero back instantly, albeit with half life and no mana whatsoever, as opposed to full life and 100 mana. Nonetheless, that's better because playing undead without one of your heroes is usually not really playing undead. The Lich is crucial for damage and the Death Knight is crucial for healing and speed. The Acolytes are the underpinnings of it all, and for my tier list I'm thinking, which unit can you play without? Is this a unit you make every game? Check. Is it absolutely crucial? Check. Acolyte is tier S. Okay, next. Abomination. Abomination is a tier 3 heavy melee unit that has an ability that does not stack. You see, the Abomination and the Meat Wagon, and by now also Animate Dead, can receive the upgrade called Disease Cloud. Disease Cloud has been rebalanced a bit. It has done 1 damage per second and it has done 2 damage per second. Right now I believe it's in the 2 damage per second category. Anytime Abomination walks past one of the enemy units, they will get disease and they'll be diseased for over a minute for 2 damage per second. That is pretty strong. It is undispellable, and on Night Elf units that do not heal during the day, that's damage that sticks. Against Undead it doesn't work, so in Undead Mirror it doesn't really do very much. And then against human it is also particularly good, because any human that relies on priests will be constantly stuck in the healing animation for full HP units as they lose 1 or 2 health from Disease Cloud. So the priests are essentially burning up their mana pool so long as you leave them on autocast. Now you can get around this with skill by turning off all the priest autocast, but no matter what, that is a huge APM tax, distraction, brain drain, mana waste on the priest that Abomination achieves. And even if something is being healed, Disease Cloud opens up other units that have been not healed, and they'll be able to be killed more easily. But Abomination is not something you need to mash, because 5 Abominations do not make you any sicker than 1 Abomination. So it's very unlike food poisoning, where if you eat more of the same thing, you'll actually feel worse than if you only ate a little bit. Source, myself, I just finished my 6th bout of food poisoning. Do not recommend unless you're looking to lose weight. Not my official advice, by the way. Do not do that, consult the doctor. So anyway, also consult the doctor if you ever see one of these Abominations. But as much as I'm gassing up the Abomination Disease Cloud, I don't think the unit is good enough to be in even half the games that Undead has. Ghouls, Fiends, as we'll get to later, are crucial and key. When you combine the Ghoul and the Abomination, they are essentially the same thing. One is slow, one is fast, one is tanky, one is fragile. They both hit, right? But they are essentially the same thing. So what you actually want is to have something very unique. Disease Cloud does definitely do that. but it is an occasional inclusion, right? It comes out pretty late. Abomination has a couple of hard counters like kiting, slow, magic damage, and air. And so it is rare for you to want to go into them. Abomination probably had their peak in the year 2003 and 4. It was very common to go Death Knight Lich Crypt Lord against both Night Elf and against Human, and then go double Slaughterhouse Abominations. They would not counter with Chimera and Gryphon Riders, even though those were available, because people usually just played one build, like Rifle Caster for Human, and for Night Elf it was like Huntress, Archer, Dryad, Talon. And Abominations basically formed a good level of tankiness that you could coil. The game pace was a little slower, and so there was more creeping and less fighting. There were more mistakes, so games went on for longer. So you could often heal up those Abominations with coil level 3. Now the game is faster. We're talking more about timings. I think StarCraft 2 also opened many WARCRAFT 3 players' eyes to the importance of timings and hitting when you're completing certain crucial upgrades and getting certain hero levels and getting to tier 3 and getting your orb. So it is far more common nowadays to see 9-minute, 10-minute all-ins. And in the past it was more common to play a more timeless style where both players are not sure exactly when is their most powerful spike in the game. Of course, some people did play around power spikes, but they weren't as maybe good at closing out the game, and then it goes on and you could go maybe mass abominations. I think abominations are tier C. They are part of a list of units that are suffering from the evolution of what WARCRAFT 3 has become. So WARCRAFT 3 is probably slightly leaning more heavily into the hegemony, into the domination of ranged units and kiting, and a little bit less into heavy melee. You saw that in my appraisal of the Tauren in the recent balance patch notes, and Abomination suffers a little bit the same fate as well, in that he's counterable. He does come from a better building than the Tauren. He doesn't do as much damage, except via Disease Cloud. He may actually do thousands of damage. And that remains his most powerful niche. You may add Abomination to Disease Cloud people, but usually Undeads at top level play other units. When they go for any, they make one. And I'd like to say they can probably win with or without tier C. It's not a D, it's not a never use, but it is definitely not good and viable unit either. It is uncommon to see it. Okay, the Banshee. Banshee is an interesting unit, allowing Undead to actually branch into new races. If you possess an enemy worker, you can start building their town for yourself and getting one of those heroes from the other race. That's a really cool thing that you could maybe do, but it doesn't actually have any professional merit. There has been one famous game where someone stole a worker and built up their town in a pro game, but it was more of a showboating for the fans, a kind of fan service from a position of great domination, than it really was the best given thing to do in that situation. And it was with Dark Ranger's charm, ultimate ability, and not with Banshees. I have gone mass Banshees before in a competitive WARCRAFT game as Undead. I was randoming in an online tournament, and then I would end up stealing all the creeps, and then I beat my opponents with creeps. But that was also kind of a showboating moment. It's because I knew I could do it, but again, against someone of your own level, that's generally not often going to work. That's just one way of using possession though. There is a non-clowning way to use possession. You can steal enemy high-value units like Raiders, Kodos, Taurens. You could steal Fiends or Abominations if you can get away with it. Knights. And I think Knights and Kodos are probably the most common steal targets. Knights, Kodos, and Raiders. I think those three are the most commonly stolen. And it does happen in real games, real pro games. They have real purpose with possession. And then let's talk about the other two spells. Curse and Anti-Magic Shell. Anti-Magic Shell was used as early back as Reign of Chaos. Back then it worked differently. If the Banshee cast Anti-Magic Shell on ghouls, ghouls could not be slowed by sorceresses. So it was very common to coat your army in the bioluminescent grey shield to make sure that the ghouls remained kite-free, that they didn't get thunderclapped, they didn't get stormbolted, they couldn't get slowed. But AMS has changed by now. Now AMS does allow the units underneath to be slowed, but it's simply a magic damage shield absorption thing. And it has received more changes. Whereas before you could not dispel it, it was only procced via receiving magic damage. Now it can be dispelled, but not outright. Dispel now deals damage to it, just like it deals damage to summoned units. So think of AMS as a big magic damage barrier that can be damaged by dispel. By far the most common use of AMS is simply protecting your units and heroes from nukes like Frost Nova, Impale, Blizzard, Thunderclap, Warstomp, Shockwave, and AMS is an incredibly cheap solution for all that. I think Banshee is in the right situation. It is just an incredibly powerful unit based on the spells I've mentioned so far. But wait, there's one more. Curse. Curse offers a 33% miss chance on enemy units for a pretty long period of time. I think it's maybe 45 seconds. It's relatively cheap and spammable. Fun fact about Curse, in 2019 I visited the Blizzard offices. This is before Reforged came out and before we knew how poorly received, justifiably, it would become. Hope was still there for Reforged to be a great remaster. But anyway, it was super cool. I met a lot of cool devs that really seemed to have their heart in the right place, but they were eventually undercut by the management, of course. I spoke to one of the programmers and he said he had looked at the Banshee code and he said the mischance for Banshee Curse is not actually 33%. It roughly came out to 28%, so it's been weaker, which is exactly opposite to what I always believed. I've always believed in the conspiracy that I miss far more against Curse than 33%, but apparently it's less. Unless he was either lying or incompetent. I don't know. So Curse is very strong to make people miss their hits. It's incredibly powerful against anyone that doesn't have mass area of effect dispel. And Banshee is just an all-around good unit that you cannot rush. You cannot mass them. You cannot get them when your army is small. But if you get to 50 population plus and you're looking to diversify your army before pushing over 50 upkeep, Banshee is just about a fantastic inclusion. Tier B. Next up, Carrion Beetles. Carrion Beetles spawn as a hero summon from the Crypt Lord, who is Tier D. That makes Beetles Tier D as well, by that reasoning. They have a cool thing going. They are permanent. They do not unsummon like every other summon in the game, and that is a pretty cool niche. They also had their moment in 2020 with Reforged, where they had baseline burrow, like just straight up, you could just burrow them. But now they don't have burrow anymore. They only get burrow at tier 2 once you upgrade it for fiends. And so the Beetle hegemony is over, their domination period is over. They do not like prevent people from expanding by burrowing in a couple of places where you would want to put down the expand. Can't build there, something in the way. I think it's a burrowed Beetle. Not possible anymore, bruv, because they are only able to burrow at tier 2. So, the Beetle is tier D. Crypt Fiend. Ooh, what about the Crypt Fiend? Crypt Fiend was the pinnacle unit for Undead, until Ghoul became it about a year or two ago. Fiend does just about everything. They are tanky, they do pretty good damage. Their attack projectile is actually heavily delayed compared to many attacks in the game. It's very slow traveling, which is bad, but there's something good about it because of the Orb of Corruption. The Lich Orb of Corruption is a negative armor debuff giver, and that means that anytime the Lich and the Fiends attack the same thing, the Fiends all benefit from the physical armor reduction because they were kind enough to wait with their attack impacting, and that actually helps quite a bit. Fiend is a tier S unit. It is a strong ground unit that also has an instant autocast web. Now web is either autocast or manual cast, but what I find, and I don't know if you guys feel the same, if an air unit is nearby and you think that you're gonna take the Fiend and you're gonna press the W on the unit to web them, the Fiend will walk towards it and actually be slower to get it, What I instead do, I make sure that I'm near within range based on feeling, and then I just press stop on my Fiend. Then it auto acquires web from the autocast, and I feel like invariably it catches the air unit better than if I manually cast the web. That's what I'm like. It's just instantly, it just works. And you'll find later how strong I think raiders are with ensnare. Fiends have that ensnare, but they have a full overlap by themselves. Whereas you needed 3 raiders to perma ensnare somebody, or 4 raiders in current patch to perma ensnare somebody, Fiend almost perma ensnares somebody by themselves. Their cooldown and their duration of the web is virtually the same. So if there's 5 Fiends and there's 5 Wind Riders, those Wind Riders aren't going to get away until either everyone on one side is dead, like either all the Wyverns are dead or all the Fiends are dead, and then there will be a resolution. So long as the Fiends are there, they're not getting away. But it works only on air, of course. And then Snare works on ground, which is a massive advantage. They're already a decent unit, a very good unit in a normal anti-ground battle, but it just removes air before air even becomes a thing in many cases. It is a very strong, flexible unit. They have burrow, they have the delayed attack, they have the anti-air. They're so flexible, you can use them in every matchup, every game, and you can't really go wrong. Fiend is a tier S. Next up, the Statue and the Destroyer. Undead has several forms of healing. They now have the Sacrificial Dagger. They have Death Knight with Unholy Aura that has regeneration, and they have Death Coil. They also have Blight. An Undead on Blight will heal 4 times as fast as an Orc or Human anytime. But off Blight, Undead doesn't heal at all. So this is how that part is balanced, right? If they are on the map, their units do not regenerate without Unholy Aura. But if they're on Blight, they regen quite fast. But Warcraft is not a game where you can sit back and you can turtle up and not contest the objectives on the map. And what are the objectives? Well, the creeps, of course. The expansions, but also the creeps. There's a zero-sum game, as creep camps in Warcraft 3 do not respawn. So long as there are any creeps, you must go out there. And going out there is a dangerous thing. Setting 1 foot in front of another, or in the Fiend's case, many feet in front of another. And in the Statue's case, no feet at all. So how do you heal yourself and sustain yourself through the epic campaign of your escapades into the world of Azeroth as you compete for creep camps with your opponent? The Obsidian Statue. The statue gives pulses of healing and pulses of mana regeneration, and they are a staple unit every single game Undead plays. Not just because of what they represent, but also because of what they turn into. The Destroyer. The Destroyer is a transformation from the statue that maintains its health percentage, though the maximum health goes up. And as it maintains the health percentage, that means it will gain health, obviously, because the max is higher. And Destroyers can also take the statue mana from statues that are still in play. Destroyers that are in play can absorb the mana from statues to take that into themselves. And Destroyers have mana decay, so negative generation of mana. So the only way that they can get mana is to either absorb it from allies, taking all of what they have for themselves, or they can devour magic, buffs and debuffs alike, and for all enemy buffs and all allied debuffs that they remove, they gain a portion of health and mana. Finally, the mana that Destroyers get go into Orb of Annihilation, which is an orb effect that applies a mana cost consumption per attack, per auto attack, and adds bonus damage. Destroyer's base damage is 20 magic, and Orb of Annihilation is 25 bonus magic damage, which is also splash damage. So they're doing much more than double their damage, provided they have any mana whatsoever. So they do not just dispel and form the only dispel of the Undead army, but they also actively use enemy summons, enemy debuffs, and allied, enemy debuffs on you and enemy buffs on themselves. They remove all that and actively use it to buff up their own damage. While they're taking spells and using it, Destroyers are tier S. While they have no mana, they're much more like flying junk. So I find it really hard to place this unit. The statues are tier S, also because they choose to become a destroyer at a later decision. That decision can be deferred and can be delayed, right? And once you make it into destroyer, well, there's no going back. That's a 5 food unit for 300 gold total. That of course did live part of its life as a different form that gave regeneration. So it's not like you spend straight up 300 gold. And destroyers also both a luxury, as in they are the only flying dispel unit in the game in Warcraft Melee. But that's also a liability, because flyers have their own counters, like bad riders, enemy fiends that can web them, flying machines. The moment human has a concord of flying machines, you may not feel like making any destroyers whatsoever anymore, and that means that you are functionally without dispel as an undead. So I feel like destroyers are both very strong as the only flying dispel. That means you can get much easier to locations to remove buffs and summons. But they're also a huge liability. Weak without mana, you can be baited into transforming too many of them. They are countered by things that do not counter many other unsummoners and dispellers. So I'm not sure if they should be tier S or B. I'm going to put them in tier A. A strong unit that has a good place. But I like to think that if Undead had other forms of dispel, you wouldn't go for them quite as much as you are now. Frostwyrm. Frostwyrm suffers from a design problem, in a way. Frostwyrm is at once one of the strongest and coolest units in the game, as well as kind of being a big liability. Frostwyrm is a 7 population unit, which is a heavy air flying that suffers from the same problem as Abomination. Having multiple does not increase their effect. If you have 2 fiends, you can web 2 people. If you have 2 statues, you can heal health and mana. 2 abominations does not spread double level disease cloud. It's just still disease cloud. You can maybe spread it a bit better, but that's about it. Frostwyrm has the same problem. Frostwyrm does a frost attack that slows enemy movement and attack speed. Like Nerubian, Frost Armor, and Nova, it's always set at 50%. This is the hard-coded internal frost value for all things that are slow from Undead. It's always 50% attack speed, 50% movement speed. That is a very strong thing to do, but Frostwyrm range is, I believe, only 350, which is a little more than melee. It's slightly over melee, short range. Now, that slow attack, that's pretty cool, but if you have 7 Frostwyrms attacking the same thing, they're not slowed for longer or for more than what a single worm would have done. Now, you may say, of course, well, you could just slow all the different things with Wyrm, but Warcraft fights are not won. It's 300 range? 300, it's pretty close, right? Warcraft fights are not won by spreading your 7 most powerful units damage on 7 different things. Because enemy units that have 1 HP still deal full damage. I guess that's one thing I do like about games like Company of Heroes or Dawn of War. That essentially when a unit or regiment takes damage, they actually deal less damage. Whereas in Warcraft 3, a 1 HP unit still deals full damage. So it's very important to finish off units. Which means that Wyrm's special attack style, the frozen effect that they have on units, is kind of wasted when you have more. You compare that to Wind Riders. Wind Rider and Venom does actually stack when it comes from multiple Wind Riders. You could leave a unit at 500 health and it goes to 1 HP from poison. For Frostwyrm, not so much. It's also 7 population. Here's another problem for Frostwyrms. Frostwyrms come from the building Boneyard. This used to have the Sacrificial Pit prerequisite, which was a great tell that the Undead was probably gonna go for Frostwyrms. Even though that prerequisite has been removed, Boneyard still does nothing else than make Frostwyrms. So the intelligent player, the prolific scouter, will know that the Boneyard equals Frostwyrms. And therefore they can prepare for it. And they have a lot of counters, Frostwyrms. The best orc counter is ensnare them and then focus them down with berserkers. The best human counter is simply 1 Dragonhawk at less than half of its population. 3 against 7. You shackle the worm and that's it, you know. Even flying machines that are not designed at all to take on such heavy air with enough numbers, though with less population investment than worms, will still destroy Frostwyrms. In Undead Mirror, you can web them and focus them down with fiends. You can even outrange them with those same fiends. So Wyrms will do practically nothing. They are countered by many things. They announce their arrival via the existence of the Boneyard. They are a powerful unit in FFA and in 4-on-4, but in the tight alley fight of a 1-on-1, Frost Wyrms are tier D. They are too easily countered. They are too expensive to get. Their effect is too unimportant. Tier D. Sad. So sad, right? Oh no! My chat is so sad and shocked. Take it back. Alright, they're tier S, but only in your dreams. Take a quick screenshot, hang it over your wall. Here we go, tier D. Next. Gargoyles. Gargoyle is an anti-air unit, a little bit similar to the StarCraft 1 Scout, but more useful than the StarCraft 1 Scout. You see, the Gargoyle is a cheap flying unit that is pretty fast, that has its own regeneration at tier 3 upgrade. It has insanely good anti-air attack that synergizes well with Frost Nova and Vampiric Aura. So there's natural buffs from heroes in the Undead race that can help support the Gargs. Unholy Aura is another great enabler for Gargs to help them run things down or run away from bad fights. Anytime Gargs get beaten in a fight, they can simply go stone form to sit out the rest of the fight. The opponent will have invested a lot in anti-air. The Gargs can initially focus on killing some ground units, then they go to stone form, heal up, they can wait things out. You can wait for your next carrion swarm on flying machines, and once the flying machines are weaker and weakened or killed, they can come back up again and start fighting. Gargs have been used traditionally for laming, killing mass wisps on maps like Twisted Meadows, together with Zeppelin drops, taking the islands back when Twisted Meadows Islands were still protected by level 10 dragon. Nowadays it's a Granite Golem level 9. Much harder to take for the Gargoyles. The Gargoyles have some play traditionally, historically always against Orc. Not a lot, because they get hard countered by bats, but 2 to 4 smart Gargoyles can be pretty useful. Even 1 or 2 can be pretty useful from time to time. I think they're as good of a unit as Banshee, in that they are very versatile. The anti-ground attack is a little weak, but because air units in Warcraft 3 can lose their collision by grouping up in one place, they have a kind of focus fire advantage against units like the Dryad. You think a Dryad and Archer army should in theory counter Gargs, but in reality it's often not like that because of the clumping up that Gargs can do, the speed, the fact that Undead can choose when to take the fight because of their mobility advantage, both the speed and the flying dimension element. And so I think they're a great counter unit. They work a little bit like Mutalisks, right? It gives you a lot of control. You can use them with laming. You can use them to kill workers, win air battles. Sometimes you can just spam them, only Gargs all the way to 100 food, because you think that the opponent is not good enough at dealing with large amounts of Gargs, aka you're playing against a Night Elf that can only go Hippogriffs or what? Like, what does Night Elf do? Hippogriff is like a Garg that can't creep. Garg can creep. So if you start an arms race of Hippos and I start an arms race of Gargs, it's like, okay, do you have Roar? Do you have Protection Scroll? Do you have Heal Scroll? For me too, do I have Vampiric? Do I have Heal Scroll? Protection Scroll? But at any moment we're not having an all-out fight, I'm creeping with Gargs, killing buildings and workers, and Hippos do nothing, right? So it's again that versatility that puts them in tier B. They're obviously not a staple unit every game, so I can't put them in A, but they're perfectly solid, good unit in the Undead race. Tier B. Ghoul. I know it's a bit of a meme to have Acolyte in tier S, right? Because they're not a fighting unit, they're a worker, but obviously they're essential. It's the same for the Ghoul, but I feel like it's important to specify that the Ghoul is not here by virtue of being a worker for lumber. Like, let's say that I just put Acolyte in B for the principle, right? Or if I don't even rate Acolyte, then by the same reckoning, I wouldn't rate the Ghoul for his economy contribution. But even if I don't, he would still be tier S. Ghouls were buffed in the current patch of Warcraft 3 from having a 25% attack speed bonus to a 35% attack speed bonus on Ghoul Frenzy, which takes 60 seconds to upgrade and unlocks at tier 3. This makes them have very high damage. They're units that you can have in escrow because you are using them for lumber gathering. So even when ghouls are not fighting, you can still build up lumber supply, and then you can use all of them, including what would normally be designated as your woodworkers. Because you could play a game of Undead where from the start of the game till the end you've got 3 ghouls on lumber, you never touch them, and any surplus you fight with them. So in theory, if 3 ghouls are your lumber supply, that's quite a large advantage that you can bring in 3 extra units by temporarily mining with 8 ghouls on lumber, right? So this is a kind of flexibility that you can bring in more units than another race. It's like bringing 6 militia as human, but they never turn back to peasants. Or it's like summoning 2 grunts from out of nowhere. You Captain Planet 6 peons and you turn them into grunts. And you have 2 extra grunts. So that's pretty valuable for a timing attack. Ghouls are very fast, so they're good at surrounding and body blocking and catching. They're also good at escaping if you are extremely fast and good at micro, because they are fragile. They're extremely fragile. They get owned by basically everything in the game. And nonetheless, with some heal scrolls, maybe with some statues, micro, blight, coil, etc., ghouls are part of every single game of Undead play. They are strong. They provide a lot of issues for human players early game, for night elf players. They're used against orc mostly to out-creep the orc and then to attack the berserkers, which is a staple unit for orc. I find this very hard. I will admit that I cannot use ghouls like a top player because I'm not an Undead main player and they're too small and finicky. They die too fast for me. But from seeing all the pro games, from playing against Undeads and everything, it is clear that Undead ghouls right now are tier S unit. Though the new PTR brings a change where they will lose 10% of that bonus attack speed, and they will probably still be tier S. Wagon. Wagon is a slow, though in the new PTR they get 20 bonus movement speed. Wagon is a slow tier 2 siege unit whose only purpose is to break out of the Undead base when you're getting tower rushed. Now, pretty much no one is tower rushing Undead anymore, but if you do, you may see a Wagon, the rare Wagon. Wagon has a design purpose of being the carrier of corpses, which can then be used in conjunction with necromancers to bring corpse resource anywhere on the map, so you can summon lots of necromancers. I'm not going to say this mechanic never gets used. In fact, I have heard reports that Happy is experimenting. The best player in the world in Undead is experimenting with necromancers, though I don't know if he used meat wagons with them. I haven't seen it yet. Oh yeah, there's one more case where you go meat wagons. It's to defend against siege engines when the human is massing tanks. So meat wagons have a purpose. I don't think you could remove meat wagon from the game and say that Undead is unaffected in one-on-one. I think you could remove Beetle and Frostworm and they won't even know until like 7 years later. But if you remove the meat wagon and the Abomination, I think there will be a problem where Undead needed it for some situation but don't have it. They're not strong enough to ever be part of a standard strategy, but they are an important counter unit, and I see C for counter. Necromancer. Necromancer has received buff after buff after buff after buff. Necromancer gives Raise Dead from a corpse to skeletons, these skeletons. Or if you upgrade it with Skeleton Mastery, 1 normal skeleton with 180 health and 1 skeletal mage with, I believe, 220 health. And he can also attack range, and although he's called a mage, he doesn't have a magic attack damage. He's got a piercing attack damage. He's got piercing damage. So that's a good attack type against unarmored and light armor, which all air units are unarmored or light. And some ground units are also unarmored. So that's pretty nice. Skeletal Mastery upgrade. Necromancer gives Raise Dead, Unholy Frenzy, and Cripple. Cripple is a tier 3 spell that is expensive. 175 mana, and it does 70% damage reduction and also greatly slows movement speed. As a single target spell that's not autocast, that is expensive, any dispel in the game at that point is cheaper than Cripple itself. And while Polymorph, that in the new PTR will work on heroes, stops a hero from casting any items or spells or anything like that and can still be attacked, Cripple does not do that at almost the same mana cost. Cripple also doesn't remove a unit from the game like Cyclone. It just makes them weaker. So among the 3 great debuff spells on the casters, Cripple's probably the worst. It's not bad though. It lasts much longer than the others. Cripple on a hero on a like Blade Master is absolutely debilitating to his damage output. However, it's probably not good enough to go Necros just to try and cripple high value targets. There needs to be another reason to get them. So what are the other reasons? Unholy Frenzy is a physical damage buff of 70% attack speed, which is really nice on any unit that has naturally good damage. Which unit in the Undead race has good damage? Ghoul, but he's very fragile to cast such an expensive spell on, like Frenzy. It's pretty good on Fiends. It cannot be cast on Destroyers. It cannot really be useful on Banshees or Necros themselves. Frenzy Gargs are actually pretty sick. They are pretty sick, but you would sooner go Banshees to protect them from hero magic damage than to make them better at something they are already so good at, which is killing air units. On Abominations, it's pretty cool, but Abominations are not really known for their damage, and buffing it further, it's just weird because melee units get kited a lot. It doesn't give them move speed, which is what they would need the most. It's very good on Frostworms, which unfortunately are a tier D unit. And then finally on heroes, on Lich and on Dark Ranger. Maybe on Pit Lord or on a Dreadlord with Vampiric Aura. Frenzy are pretty cool on all of those. But it's probably not enough reason to make a Temple of the Damned, get a Necro, and then upgrade it. Usually, it's not because they're bad, or that doing that would be bad, but it's that in a game you would be giving up something else. And it's exactly that opportunity cost of going for the Necromancer that will lose you out on something else. If you get it at tier 2, that means your tier 3 is delayed, that means your Lich Corruption Orb is delayed. It also means your Destroyer upgrade is delayed, which means your Dispel is delayed. That means that things like Hex and Slow and Summons can continue to have great effect against the Undead. It's the opportunity cost of not going for Destroyers fast enough and getting the 3rd hero and getting the Orb that pretty much means you're usually not making an early temple for some Necromancers. As much as I think it'd be cool if that were a thing, it's probably not. So that makes them not OP. It makes them not extremely viable and common. It probably doesn't even make them like a good staple unit. At best, Necros are a counter unit. But I do think they're better than a useless unit, right? Necros shine with their first ability, which is called Raise Dead. Raising the dead and making many skeletons out of many corpses requires corpses. It requires death. So they are best combined together with ghouls that end up dying, or enemy workers or units that end up dying. How do you kill many enemy units? Usually with a Destroyer Flood on things like Footmen and Militia, or you just use ghouls and Frost Nova. So in certain situations, the enemy has really good siege defenses, like they have a lot of towers, they have buildings, but they don't have a lot of Dispel. If an enemy opens with Mounting first, they give up the value of Brilliance Aura, so they won't have much Dispel even if they do end up going for Priests. That makes a build like Wagon Necromancer actually really powerful. When the opponent goes away from the meta of Archmage and maybe having Priests available, and usually these days humans don't play Priest at all against Undead anymore, but at least if you have Archmage, it enables Priest play, should you see Temples of the Damned. But a Mountain King player doesn't want to go for Sanctum at all, and that could give Necros their niche. It remains a counter unit against human. You probably won't see them against Undead, because Destroyer is the biggest counter of Necros ever. Against Night Elf, Necros are... I wish I could say they were viable, but I really don't think they are. Although Night Elf can struggle with Dispel more than almost any race, because Abolish from Dryads is single target, and while Wisps are AoE, that's a worker that you need to get up close to then sacrifice it. That's 60 golds per worker, and then you will kill all the normal skeletons, but you won't kill all the skeletal mages. They will still have like 20 health or so after Wisp Detonate. I'm just gonna put these here together with the Necro so they feel nice together. He and his undead army. He'll be in between his undead army. It can work against Night Elf, Necros. Against Orc, I have seen some players like Krav has tried to go Necros against Orc. I had a lot of cool games against him when we were both playing our absolute best. And I was one of the Orcs that was more comfortable playing against it because I play non-meta a lot. But I could see it working against more of a meta slave. Still, I think at equal level, generally Necros don't really work so well. At least at the higher levels of play. But I think anyone watching this that does still play Warcraft 3, that likes to play but is not a top player or a champ, I think everyone should try Necros more. They're fun, and maybe a lot of people aren't going to be able to deal with them that well. I don't think they're non-viable, but yeah, they can't really be higher. Next, Shade. Shade is a non-combat unit and also doesn't benefit from the backpack upgrade. Backpack is not a crucial upgrade for most races or most players, so it's fine that he doesn't have it. Shade is invisible, can only be seen with detection. He himself has detection, so he can see things like sentry wards, blade master in Windwalk, and other things that are invisible, so that's pretty useful. Right? Shade is made from an Acolyte who is tier S, so you would think he's probably tier S2 then, right? But as my statue destroyer evaluation showed, I don't think the new evolution of a Charmander is always a Charizard or a Charmeleon. I think sometimes you lose something as well, right? And so I think the Shade, I have to ask myself, for a non-combat unit, how crucial is it to Undead? I don't think there's a single game ever that you could not play without a Shade when you use the Shade. Right? It's a ground observer, a ground Protoss observer. Shade is something Happy gets against Blade Master. Happy, best player in the world, he gets Shade regularly, these days even. But I can't say that they are tier S because of that, right? It is situational, only against in certain situations if the enemy has Blade. Usually you won't get a Shade. There's a very niche application to them. And even when you're playing Shade against Blade, it's partially a luxury, and you could compensate with having Dust of Appearance instead, which is a smaller upfront cost and even sticks to the unit when they run away. But of course Shade is enduring and is always there, and Dust is ephemeral and has charges and has cost. Eventually Shade may earn itself back. It's not a tier S, it's not an A, it's not a D because it's useful. I think Shade is a counter unit, so it's either B or C. It is a counter unit, but information in a game of imperfect information is also so valuable that I could actually see it as a B. I do think every game you play could benefit quite a bit from making a Shade. Especially if you make the pit, you make the Shade, and then you unsummon the pit. The pit is cheap enough as it is. I think it's 175/150. If you unsummon it, they may never even know that you have the Shade. So you're constantly having a small form of telescope-based map hack that reveals where the opponent is, because it's not just about seeing invisible things, it's about seeing a bunch of things. And of course Shade has a pretty cool application too. You can put them in the position of the enemy expansion, and then every time their worker tries to build the Great Hall or the Town Hall, they get the good old "can't build there." So then of course they do know you have a Shade, unless they don't know the game that well. Shade is tier B, I would say. And then finally, Inferno. Where do we place Inferno? 1600 health, chaos damage, burning aura, stun upon impact, level 6 ultimate ability for the Dreadlord. Obviously tier S unit. It's a bit of a meme. I don't think he's supposed to be in the list, but I added him anyway because I was getting all the icons from this page. And this page says Inferno is an undead unit. If I could build an army of only Infernals instead of Ghouls, I actually would. Imagine having like 10-15 Infernals instead of 10-15 Ghouls. I think it'd be a lot better. And if you disagree, I think you're wrong. In fact, if you're so brave and you disagree with me and you think that Inferno is the worst unit ever and should be in a new tier F, I dare you to leave a comment on this YouTube video to tell me that. But if you agree with me and you think that Infernals actually are a tier S unit, make sure to hit subscribe on this video so that we can agree on more things in the future. Thanks for watching this video. Bye, see you next time.